what is going on with Unity? If you ask yourself this question sometimes over the last few days, don't worry, we have too. Now, for those who haven't heard, there has been major drama on Twitter surrounding the price changes being implemented for developers using the Unity engine. Now, before you say, I don't even use Unity, I'm not even a game developer, trust me when I say this, guys. The gravity of these changes will affect the entire gaming industry. This is not just going to affect developers, but us as consumers. Now, I know there has been a lot of confusion surrounding this topic, which is why we're going to be breaking everything down in today's video. Now, what is Unity? Unity is one of several software framework game developers can use to build their games. Other examples include Unreal Engine, the Creation Engine, Tiger Engine, the list goes on. Most game engines are proprietary and constructed by developers for specific AAA studios. However, designing a game engine is a monumental task that requires many technical resources and a load of money. We recently did a video on the Tiger Engine and essentially everything that took place to get the Tiger Engine, which is Destiny's engine, up to snuff before the launch of Destiny. And it was crazy because in our research, just simply upgrading the engine took Bungie pulling 500 people to pull that off over a 3 to 4 year time frame. Now, those are big development studios. They have the ability to do that. But what do you do if you're a solo or small developer? Well, you use a non-proprietary game engine designed to be licensed and used by development teams. The two mainstream platforms for game developers currently are Unity and Unreal Engine, which takes us to this past week, September the 12th. Unity Technologies released a blog post announcing a change to their pricing structure, and starting on January the 1st, 2024, developers will be charged a set fee for every installation a user makes of their game. Now, for most users, this fee is 20 cents per install, but for pro and enterprise users, this fee is reduced as installs increase. So essentially, you distribute more copies, you pay less money. Now, developers won't start racking up these fees immediately. Unity only starts charging you after you cross a 200,000 revenue threshold and a 200,000 install threshold. However, this applies retroactively. So if your game has already hit that revenue threshold over the past 12 months and the installation threshold over its lifetime, all future installs will cost you. Now, we need to clarify. You need to cross both of those thresholds before Unity hits you with a fee. There's been a lot of miscommunication surrounding this particular point. It's not just one, both need to be true. For pro and enterprise users, these thresholds are higher at $1 million, but the same rules apply. Now, a side note, if you're wondering the difference between each of Unity's plans, Personal is the only free one. Plus, through Enterprise, all require you to pay a subscription fee. Don't pay any mind to the industry plan though. That's for other software applications outside of gaming. They also offer a free student plan as well. Now, as soon as its announcement was released, Unity developers were furious. Twitter became a war zone, and never before have we seen so many veteran users turn on a company this fast. These aren't just solo developers, mind you. The backlash is coming from major indie studios who have released many popular titles over the past few years. Some examples: Landfall Games, Innersloth, and Megacrit, just to name a few. Even Jeff Keighley, host of the Game Awards, chimed in on this. Now, for these developers, these are people who have spent years crafting their skill sets in this software program, most of whom love using it. But this single change has definitely eradicated any goodwill for even the most loyal Unity supporters. By the way, Games Radar actually has a fantastic article where they interviewed 10 developers affected by these changes. We'll have that linked in the video description. Now, you may still be wondering, why? Why are developers so upset? Unity raised the price of their software, but it's only 20 cents, right? How is that even a big deal? Let's put it this way. You own an apartment. You pay rent for that apartment each month. After living in that apartment for 7 years, your landlord tells you that next year, every time you leave the apartment for any reason, you need to pay a fee. It doesn't matter if you're leaving for work, grabbing the mail, walking the dog, you're gonna get charged. That's essentially what these changes are, which is why I believe you're gonna see a mass exodus from Unity. Now, on to the installation issues. Another question that people have been wondering: what qualifies as an install? Now, this is a very important question because no other game developer is doing this. At first, Unity said that initial installs, reinstalls, hardware changes, demos, and early access would all be incorporated into the total installation count, meaning developers could be charged multiple times by the same user. Now, immediately, developers raised concerns about review bombing and bad actors who could theoretically inflate fees for a game they don't like. Pirated copies of games supposedly would be filtered out, by Unity's proprietary data collection techniques, and fees accrued by games on streaming services like Xbox Game Pass would be directed to the owners of the respective service, so in this example, Microsoft. Now, since then, Unity has walked back these rules and retroactively changed the language of their blog posts to only include new installs. Early access downloads will still be enumerated, but demos and every other form of reinstallation would not count towards those total installs. But you gotta say, guys, imagine how many times you delete games and in the future reinstall them just to free up space on your hard drives. Now, even after these adjustments, this model is still problematic. How does Unity verify new installations? Already, many users are now concerned if Unity would be violating privacy laws in some regions to gather this information. Unity is essentially creating a black box that only they can see, and they expect everyone else to just put their full faith in that system. Now let's go ahead and look at how other popular game engines charge their customers. Unreal Engine is free to use. After your game generates $1 million in revenue, then Unreal Engine begins charging a 5% royalty fee on any gross revenue made beyond that threshold. So if you make 1.5 million, you owe Unreal 5% of that 500K. Now this includes any revenue generated for the project, meaning if a publisher funds your game in advance, that money will count towards your gross revenue. CryEngine, another free-to-use game engine, operates under a similar model, charging 5% royalty fees after generating a much lower $5,000 of revenue. Godot is an open-source game engine that is completely free to use, zero fees, and zero strings attached. Now looking back at Unity's new pricing model, which is much more confusing by comparison. For higher tiers, which are essentially mandatory if you have any level of scale, you are paying a subscription to use their service. This is in addition to the runtime fee. But let's take a look at the actual price breakdown. Now, to save some time, we're going to be looking at a couple graphs that explains this beautifully. Now, first, let's look at the personal tier, because Unity will charge a fee based on number of installs. The higher you price your game, and the lower percentage of your gross revenue they will collect. When talking about Unity developers, most of these people are either solo or working in small indie teams or studios. They don't have the means to charge $60 per game, and to be real, they really aren't worth that much. That's not a bad thing, it's just reality. However, due to the law of demand, because their games are priced lower, they're more likely to sell higher quantities, meaning more total game installations. The same is true for the pro tier. You get a higher revenue and installation threshold, but both graphs exhibit analogous behavior. The lower you price your game, the higher percentage of revenue Unity collects. Now that we've identified where Unity will make the most money, we now understand why Unity is making these changes. Unity wants bigger cuts of free-to-play and mobile games. Remember the law of demand we mentioned earlier? As prices go down, quantity demanded goes up because it costs the end user nothing to try your product. This in turn inflates the number of installations, and as installations skyrocket, so does Unity's revenue. Free-to-play games have relatively high installation numbers, meaning despite how much money you make per user, you will still owe Unity the same ever-increasing fee. Okay, so you'll have to pay Unity more money. Is that really that bad? It kinda is, guys. This entire time we've been talking gross revenue, not profit. Profit is the small amount of money the devs can take home to their spouse, their kids. Revenue is all the money the developers make before expenses. Now, when you make a game, you have to pay a distribution fee to the platform that hosts your game. Steam and Apple charge 30% of the game's revenue. If you also have a publisher, which most games do, depending on your deal, you could be paying 20 to 40% on top of that. And all of this is excluding taxes. Unity doesn't use profit as a threshold. They use revenue. Your revenue might be $5 million, but when all this is said and done, that's actually less than $2 million your company has to pay things like salaries, operating costs, overhead, the list goes on. This creates situations where developers who don't heavily monetize free-to-play games will be unable to afford the fees that Unity is piling onto their business. Now keep in mind, these are not hypotheticals. This is happening. This is why certain developers will leave this platform in droves. They have no other choice, which takes us to the real question. Why is Unity tanking their business? Well, for starters, their business has already been tanking for years. Since late 2021, Unity's stock has been plummeting. This is a publicly traded company, so Unity is beholden to shareholders who want to see more profits. It also doesn't help that the CEO of Unity, John Riccitiello, has also served as CEO of another company that you're probably familiar with, EA. Not only did he sell 2,000 shares of Unity stock before this announcement, this guy is also on the record saying that devs making games without monetization in mind are idiots and alluding to ideas like charging $1 to reload ammunition in Battlefield. There may be talented people who work at Unity. The higher-ups are certifiable scumbags. At this point, I don't see Unity coming back from this. Free-to-play developers are getting completely screwed, and while traditional games won't see any major hits, who's to say Unity won't change their entire pricing model yet again in the future? Even if Unity completely walks this decision back, this move irreparably damages any trust developers may have had in doing business with Unity. Now, Cross, how does this really affect us? We're not developers, we're gamers. Well, for starters, many developers are delaying or canceling future projects now. And for some, it's already too late. You can't just switch game engines after years of development. And any title you release in Unity will accrue additional costs if it happens to be successful. Now, this puts some developers in a very precarious situation. Cult of the Lamb, a very popular title released last year by Massive Monster, has already threatened to delete their game before the pricing changes come into effect. Free-to-play games that choose to stay on Unity will be forced to either heavily monetize via microtransactions or advertisements, or shift to a traditional model so they can cover installation fees with game purchases. Another way this may seriously hurt games is reduced variety. And I don't necessarily mean the types of games to play, but in a way, games are built. You see, every game engine has its pros and cons, but having competition allows developers to choose what engine will best suit their game. Thankfully, more options do exist besides Unreal and Unity, and many developers have already expressed interest in using Godot, which is completely open source. Overall, guys, we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. This is a very complex issue. I'm sure the repercussions will be just as elaborate. While things settle down, I'd recommend supporting any indie developers who find themselves hogtied in this mess. These changes don't take effect for another 4 months, but that's a very short time scale for people considering the life cycle of development. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.